It's Kim here, the Kiwi health detective, root cause and lifestyle medicine practitioner. And in today's episode, I want to talk about something a little bit different in terms of health. And what I want to focus on is me. And actually, that's not something I particularly like doing, but I feel like what I want to talk about is who is the Kiwi health detective and what does a health detective do? And the reason for this is that in sharing what I do with a lot of people, they actually find it quite hard to grasp what it is that I do. And so I thought, okay, well, why don't I try and explain it a little bit more so that people do understand more what I do, and also why I personally feel it is so important, why it is part of the solution to the health crisis that we see in the world today. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do a little bit of my backstory as well as to how I've come to be doing what I'm doing now. So where do I start? Let's start by trying to define what it is that I actually do as a health detective and why I called myself that name. So the best way I can describe what I do is that I help people to self-heal without the use of external interventions. And when I say external interventions, what I mean is medication or supplements or maybe some sort of patch or device that somebody can use to put against themselves or hook themselves up to, which is more a sort of a new age modern way of healing, or even without surgery. Sometimes, what I do can help people avoid surgery. So my gig, if you like, my passion is to help people instigate the natural self-healing abilities of the body, which really is about restoring the body to its natural state of harmony and homeostasis. Because when we're in a natural state, we're actually in a state of homeostasis where the body is functioning well, and that means that symptoms are not being generated. But when we're sick, we're not in a state of harmony or homeostasis. And the reason that we have symptoms is because we've lost that homeostasis. And of course, our current healthcare system, which has been around for the past 150 years, which most of us were brought up in and conditioned to trust and believe was the best way to go about looking after our health. This current system does not teach people how to take care of their own health. And one of the modalities that I've studied a great deal is Chinese medicine and Qigong. And for centuries, they have been teaching people how to prevent illness. And in fact, in the olden days in China, when you went to the doctor, you only paid the doctor to keep you well. But if you were ill, you didn't have to, because their focus was on teaching people how to stay well. But in our society, in our Western society, we have grown up, and I include myself here, we have grown up in a system where we have been told that the main and best way to deal with your health is that if you have a problem, and only usually when you've got the problem, you go to a doctor and they prescribe something, usually some sort of medication, maybe a surgery, and that will sort the problem out. But the problem with this approach is that it's only really dealing with the end results. So we live in a universe of cause and effect, and the doctor's approach, because this is how they were trained at medical school. We can't blame the doctors. Doctors are very, very well-meaning. They go to medical school because they want to help people. But in unawareness of not realizing that there are other approaches, they have been taught, okay, you prescribe this, that, and the other. Well, first of all, you diagnose and then you prescribe. And that is primarily the approach of Western medicine. And most of us, or many of us, grew up believing that this was the main and the best way to deal with illness. And that's what I believed when I was growing up. I didn't know any different. When I was 13, I had appendicitis, I had surgery, I had lots and lots of diagnosed health conditions. As a child, I was given medication, and I never questioned anything until I hurt my back. And in my mid-20s, I strained my back, but because I was so disconnected from myself and so unaware about my body, I didn't do anything about it for some time until it got so bad that I couldn't bend over and tie my shoes up. And at that point, I thought, this can't be right. And I'd actually been to the doctor and they'd said, well, we can't see anything wrong. I'm not sure if I had x-rays or not, but they just told me we can't see anything wrong. Go home and rest. And so I continued on with my life until I got to the point where I couldn't tie my shoelaces. And at that point, that was the first time that I started looking outside the medical system for solutions, because I was forced to, because I wasn't getting answers from within the system. So that was the very first time that I started looking elsewhere. And I found my way to an osteopath. And the first thing he said was, you should have come to me sooner, because now your body has started to compensate for that strain. And that's not going to help your healing. And in fact, this is an issue that has plagued me for many, many years because of that, because I didn't do something about it quick enough. And it's interesting because I know a lot of other people who do this, and one of my advices now to anybody who strains their back is go and get it dealt with as soon as you can by going to a practitioner like a chiropractor or an osteopath or a craniosacral therapist or a craniosacral osteopath. Go and get it dealt with as soon as you can and get your back into alignment as soon as possible. It will pay dividends over the years. So that was my first introduction to what we could call natural health. And of course, osteopaths and chiropractors are very well established and accepted now in society. There are many other natural health practitioners who are very well accepted now, such as nutritionalists or naturopaths or acupuncturists. But there are many, many other modalities, and I'm literally talking hundreds of natural health modalities, which are not well accepted, not well known about yet, and are still labeled as woo-woo by those who still primarily believe in the mainstream approach to medicine. So over the years, I have explored more and more of these natural health modalities. And initially, it was for my own healing. It wasn't because I wanted to. It was because I was forced to, because I was not finding the answers in the Western medical system for my particular issues. And also because I didn't want to go down the route of the Western medical system for the issues I was experiencing. So not long after hurting my back, I was diagnosed with clinical depression. And when I first heard the term depression, I had never heard of it. Somebody had to explain to me what it meant. And I didn't know I was depressed, and I didn't feel depressed. Although as things started to unfold and I started to do counseling, and as my symptoms started to get worse essentially, I did come to understand that I was depressed, but it took quite a long time. For example, I remember going to work. I was working as a sales and marketing manager. It was a fantastic job, but I wasn't happy because I wasn't happy. I thought the job was making me unhappy, but actually it was because I wasn't happy. But I would go to work and I would sit at my desk for the first couple of hours of the day trying to rev myself up to find the motivation to get into my job. And then I would manage to do that, and then I would be okay for the rest of the day. And then I would come back the next day and have to do it all over again. And after a while, it just got so bad that I actually quit that job, thinking that it was the job that was making me unhappy, even though it was a great job. And actually, as I was to find out, it was because I was unhappy. So the happiness was on the inside, and I was projecting it onto the outside world, which is often what we do. So that led me into my next stage of learning and exploring more about whether to go down the Western medicine track or not, because I found myself in hospital with this clinical depression, and they wanted to give me antidepressants. And I took the pills, just one day, one lot of pills, and I could feel the effects, or the so-called side effects, that they were having on me. And even though I was depressed, I could feel that these pills were not helping me. They were not going to be the right solution. Now, by the way, I am not giving medical advice here. I think there's a time and a place for medication. So please don't take what I'm saying as what you should do. We all have to decide what we do. But for me, there was just some inner knowing this is not the right solution for the depression. And I took another route, and I'm not going to go into the story now because that would take too long of how I came through that depression. But the bottom line is I went a route where I did not take medication, and I went much more into myself and worked through things at a very, very deep level and came out the other side. But a few years later, I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. I was becoming more and more tired over a period of months, and walked into work one day and quit on the spot without any preempting that I was going to do that day, but I just could not carry on. And at that point, I went to the doctor. I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. This was back in the 90s. I was told there's no answer, there's no reason, there are no solutions, just go home and rest. So I went home, and for the first 3 months did virtually nothing. The highlight of my day was coming downstairs out of bed and watching The Love Boat. And then after 3 months, the season of The Love Boat finished, and the highlight of my day had disappeared. And it was like, well, what am I going to do now? And I had a sudden realization of, well, I can't continue to live my life like this. I cannot continue to be so exhausted that I can't do anything, and then I sit at home all day by myself doing absolutely nothing. I cannot spend the rest of my life like that. And in that moment, I made a decision that I was going to find the answers and I was going to get well. And I had no idea how I was going to do that, but I made the decision. And from that moment on, I began to find my way to a whole plethora of natural health therapies and therapists. And over the next few years, I tried over 250 different therapies. It was a very long journey. It was very frustrating. It was one step forward, one step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is helping a bit. This isn't helping. This is helping, but it's not helping anymore. It was a very, very long journey of trial and error. And at a certain point, I really started to question whether I was going to ever get well. after about 5 years of doing this, I really started to doubt whether I would ever get well. And this is very common for people with chronic fatigue when they're not finding the answers that they need. And why wouldn't one start to doubt? And so I decided that even though I was sick, I was going to fulfill a lifelong dream, because maybe I wouldn't be around a year or two later to do that. So I decided I was going to travel around the world, and I was going to go to all these places that I'd been dreaming of going. And even though I was sick, I set off to do that. And sometimes I would have to stop in one place for a few weeks because I couldn't get out of bed again. But I made my way to certain places around the world. And in retrospect, it really was a spiritual pilgrimage of sorts. But also, at the same time, what was still going on was that I was still looking for answers. I was going to many different healers, many different therapists. And it was on that trip, right at the end, that I had my turning point, where I had the big aha moment of one of the main reasons that I was still ill. And that was because I was still not dealing with the emotional trauma from the past. I was not dealing with my feelings. And because emotions are energy, and I was using unconsciously a lot of energy to hold that energy inside, I was exhausted. So I didn't have too little energy. I had a lot of energy that I was holding inside, and that was making me feel exhausted. And from that moment on, I started to really, really explore emotions and the place that emotions play in the creation of physical symptoms. Now, a lot of people still find it hard to understand that feelings can create physical symptoms. And I totally understand why one would think that, because it sounds crazy, right? To say, oh, your feelings are creating physical pain and fatigue. But this is one of the things that we have to understand if we really want to get on top of our health, is that we are a holistic being. And I like to say that there are 5 core components of that being that we are. There's our physical body, which everybody is very aware of. There is our mind, which is very complex because it's made up of our thoughts, our consciousness, our memories, our patterns of consciousness. It's made up of a lot of things, and it's very complex. We have our emotions and feelings. We have our energy, which is not talked about much in Western medicine, but it's talked about a lot in the East, and it's called chi or ki. And we have the spiritual aspect of ourselves, which is going to be whatever that is for each person, because we all have our own beliefs. We all have our own religion or not. You know, whatever we believe to be a higher power, that's very personal to each person and will be conditioned by where we grew up, our family, our culture, our country. A lot of different things go into, deciding what we believe to be a higher power. So we have these 5 core aspects of ourselves. And in order to address healing in a fundamental and comprehensive way, we need to take into account these 5 aspects. Now, if we look at Western medicine, how many of those aspects are being taken into account? Well, primarily it's the physical. You don't normally go to a doctor and talk about your energy or your chi. You don't really talk much about your feelings. You don't talk much about your beliefs and your memories. And you don't talk much about your spirituality or your religion. Western medicine is focused on the physical. And not only that, it's only focused on the end result, but not the cause. And in my explorations, this very, very long journey that I took of trial and error and trying hundreds of therapies and then ending up training to a professional level in several therapies, not because I wanted to be a therapist, but because I was healing myself. I took the training that far because they were particular therapies that were really helping me, and I was fascinated and I wanted to learn more. And so I took them to professional level. As I discovered, in order to effect healing, you need to take all those 5 components of oneself into account. And one needs to look at the root cause of what is causing the symptoms, which is almost always at a non-physical level. So we need to look at stress. We need to look at past traumas. We need to look at our beliefs and our behaviors and our lifestyle and our habits. There are so many things that we need to take into account to understand the root cause of symptoms. And of course now, especially with the advent of the internet and EMF, electromagnetic fields, we need to look at our environment. So we are also being affected by what is going on in our environment. And of course, we need to take into account herbicides and pesticides and toxins and GMO in our food. And that is more physical level. But there are many, many different components that go into causing illness. So as a health detective, that is what I do. I assess a person and I look at their whole life and their whole life history, literally from the time they were born, and even the potential effects of before they were born, i.e. when they were in the womb, because that can have imprints on in particular our nervous system and whether we're wired for stress or not. So, as one of my teachers said, we don't heal illness, we heal a person. And we don't heal a health condition, we heal a whole person's life. Now, this is not the approach of Western medicine. And how is it possible to even begin to really help somebody to heal when you go to a doctor and you have a 10-minute appointment? It is simply impossible. I feel very sorry for doctors, in fact, who work in this way and they're trying to help somebody and they have 10 minutes to listen to what their symptoms are and then to try and make a diagnosis and then prescribe some sort of remedy. This is not healing. That is just putting a Band-Aid on at the very best to the problem. So there needs to be, in my mind, in my humble opinion, a massive re-education of both the health practitioners but also the public to help people understand what it really takes to heal. And what is so important to keep emphasizing is that our body is a self-healing mechanism. And a lot of the time, I'm not going to say all of the time because that wouldn't be right, but a lot of the time, the reason that we get symptoms is because something needs addressing, something needs looking at, something needs changing, whether it's some emotional healing, some lifestyle habits and behaviors. It's something that we have the power to change, and only we have the power to change. Nobody else can do it for us. Somebody can guide us, but we actually have to do the work. And of course, we live in a society where we want the magic pill fix. So if people are primarily believing in the Western healthcare medical system, then they will want some sort of medication or maybe a surgery, and they don't even thinking about why am I sick. It just doesn't go further than that. And then for people who are stepping outside the medical system and are looking to more natural health alternatives, many people still want that fix, but it's a fix in a different way. They want some natural health supplement, or they want somebody to just do some acupuncture on them. And I'm not saying that's bad. Acupuncture is very, very helpful, and I go to acupuncture sometimes. But the point I'm trying to make here is that people are still looking to something else and to someone else to do the fixing for them, and they're not really questioning, am I playing some part in why my symptoms are being created, even if that's unconscious? Because a lot of what is going on inside us is going on an unconscious level until it becomes conscious. So true healing requires that we become a lot more conscious about how we think, how we behave, how we feel, how we respond, how we're living our life. And it takes time sometimes for people to get to that place, and often it's not until we've been very sick for a very long time that we start to become willing to take greater responsibility for our health and well-being. And of course, that was exactly what happened for me. It took me getting very, very sick to a critical condition to start to do things differently and look at different options and to take greater responsibility for my own health. So I'm not saying that this is an easy journey at all. But what I wanted to explain in this little conversation was, why is it I do what I do? And why is it that I absolutely believe in what I do? I just have no doubts that this approach to healthcare is the way of the future, and it is here now for those who are ready, if you're ready to play a greater part in your own health. And we could say, really, you're becoming your own doctor. Now, for some people, that can feel a little bit scary to hear that, but actually, it's incredibly empowering. And the only thing you really need is a guide to show you the way, which will always be the case if we're going into new territory. Just like if you were to go hiking somewhere and you've never been to, say, the South Pole, you probably want a guide who's been there many times to show you the way. So we have an incredible ability to self-heal, but we have to learn how to do it, and we have to be willing to play our part. Having worked with hundreds of clients over the years, since 2006 when I opened my clinic, and having helped hundreds of people reverse symptoms without having to take supplements or medication, and in fact, as they've reversed their symptoms, they've been able to get off their medication or reduce their medication or avoid surgery. I know without a shadow of a doubt, because I have experienced it personally and through watching other people, that our body is built to self-heal. But we have to learn how our body operates, and that doesn't just mean our physical body, it means our mind, our feelings, our stress responses. We have to take note of the effect of our everyday life habits are having on our stress and our emotions and our mind. We need to take self-responsibility, which is why one of my taglines for my business is self-care, a revolution in healthcare. This really is the new way and the future of health. And for those who are ready, it is here now. You just have to step up to the plate and say, yes, I'm ready to do it differently. So this is why I'm so passionate about helping people understand that there are other routes to looking after one's health and getting well apart from the old medical way. And I've done a huge amount of research in the last few years into the history of medicine, and I've presented on this in my presentations called The Hidden History of Medicine. And once one really understands how the medical system was set up and how Big Pharma was set up and the corruption and the deception that has gone on for the past 150 years, which is now starting to come to light, then everything all makes a lot more sense as well. So, for example, 150 years ago, it was decided by a certain group of very rich elites that they wanted to stamp out natural health. And so they started to malign natural therapists and close down natural therapy schools. And they started to replace all of that with the pharmaceutical model. Now, there's much more I could say on that, but that will be left to the Hidden History of Humanity presentations. But just to say that we have been so conditioned for decades. Our parents were, our grandparents were, our great-grandparents were. We were conditioned and brought up in a society which promulgated Western medicine, the Big Pharma model, without knowing actually what was going on. So we are now, I feel, making our way back to a more natural healthcare approach. Although, having said that, we're also, there is the option of going down another route, which is more the digital healthcare route and transhumanism and technocracy and AI. And that is a whole other story, which I'm going to cover in another episode, because that is something very, very important to be looking at, to be understanding, so that you can make the choice. Do I want to go more of an unnatural way, or do I want to go more of the natural way when it comes to looking after my health? So I hope this explains a little bit more about why I call myself a Kiwi health detective. I've really done my own journey. I have done so much training in the psycho-neuro-immunological approach to health, looking at the metaphysical underlying reasons for physical symptoms. And I find it absolutely fascinating. I find it incredibly empowering to understand one's own body, mind, and know how to take care of one's health as best as one can without having to use external interventions. Sometimes we need some external interventions, and that's okay. But to be continually relying on them and not looking at the deeper reason for why one is ill is not the most empowering, freeing, sensible way to go. So I hope that maybe what I've shared today maybe inspires, and look forward to sharing more in future episodes. This is the Kiwi Health Detective signing off, root cause and lifestyle medicine practitioner.